Well, okay, let's go ahead and get started if we can. Can everyone hear me? My name is Susan Romanek. If I can see some thumbs up to make sure our audio is good. Or in the chat, perfect. Thank you so much, Ms. Sorensen. I appreciate you letting me know you can be heard. We are right now, because we have some speakers of other languages joining us, we're going to give an opportunity for one of our bilingual liaisons to explain how that we can admit them into to use our computer tools to be able to translate in real time. So what I'm going to do, and we're going to take a few minutes to do this, so if everyone could just be patient, this is a brand new opportunity for us, but it's a way that we can best serve our entire community. I'm going to let Maite Laura, who is our program manager for translation services, explain how we can get translations turned on. So I'm going to turn it over to her for just one moment. Thank you.
Thank you, Susan. Thank you, everybody. Good morning for being here with us. It's just going to take a few minutes. This is the pre-instructions. As soon as Meets Hub start the presentation, you're going to see in your screen this screen that is in your left side, and you have to do a QR code or just type the code that is in this screen. And that is for any language that you want to receive the information in. En un momento más vamos a empezar con esta presentación. Gracias por estar aquí con nosotros. En cuanto Miss Hub empiece con su presentación, ella va a poner una lámina frente a ustedes en el lado que está aquí en el lado izquierdo. Cuando ustedes vean esa lámina a través del internet, pueden o tomar el código QR o pueden escribir el código que aparezca y entonces automáticamente van a tener la oportunidad de traducir de acuerdo al número 2 o 3, como dice en pantalla. Vamos a empezar con Miss Hub la presentación y en un momento más van a ver las instrucciones. Thank you, Susan.
I think we're muted, folks.
Susan, if you'll go ahead.
Well, that was the first technology boo-boo of the of the day. This is Susan Romanek, and I'm with our communications department. I'm serving as your moderator today, and I had forgotten to turn on my microphone. So thank you for those reminders. You're in the right place if you are here to be part of our online redistricting 101 meetings. This is the first of 2 meetings that we're holding to explain the redistricting process for Fulton County Schools. As I mentioned, I'm Susan Hale Romanek, and I'm with our communications department. I'm serving as our moderator, and we are so happy you were able to take perhaps some time away from your lunch hour. We purposely did this at noon, so if people were having a lunch, they could join us and not take too much time away from their workday or their evening. We do strongly believe that the community should be involved in all of our decision-making processes, especially for new attendance zones that affect so many families. This includes helping you feel informed and knowledgeable about our process. And so we're taking the next hour and a half to walk you through the process. And the redistricting meetings will officially begin next month and will conclude when our school board votes in December 2022. And our redistricting website does have all this information as far as the dates and the times and locations. At the end of the presentation, we'll give you that address. We will make certain that you do have ample opportunities to have that address. This is a good opportunity for explaining some of the ground rules. You will hear us muting you all periodically because there is some road noise from folks who are in cars, or perhaps they're sitting at their desk, maybe having some lunch. But at the very end of our presentation, we will have an opportunity for open Q&A about general topics. I just want to remind you that this is about the process, not about particular neighborhoods and particular zones. This is to help educate you about the process. All the participants, except for the presenter, will be muted, and the chat room is being moderated. So you see Brendan Stearns on his photo there. He is our coordinator of planning, and he will be helping out with some general questions and answers as he can. Maite Laura, who you heard a few moments ago, she is our program manager for language assistance. She will also be assisting for speakers of other languages. But without further ado, I'd like to turn this over to Ingrid Jones-Huff. She is our Deputy Chief Operations Officer. She has been with our school district for many, many, many years. I would say close to 20 years if I had to guess. And she's worked very, very closely with the redistricting process and is our expert. So Ms. Huff is going to take you through the next part of the presentation, and afterwards we will have a basic Q&A. So Ms. Huff, may I turn it over to you?
Thank you, Susan. Good afternoon, everyone.
And Ms. Huff, you may want to turn your volume up just a little bit.
Can you hear me now?
There you are. Thank you. Just get up into your microphone. Thank you so much.
Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Ingrid Jones-Huff. I am the Deputy Chief Operations Officer for Fulton County Schools. I have been with the district going into my 25th year in November. And all of those 24.5 years have been in the operational planning area. So I've been redistricting and assisting with forecasting within our district for a good while now, and have been a part of this process, know the ins and the outs of it, how it works. And so we are here today to share that information with you. So I want to just give a little bit of context of how Redistricting 101 was birthed. So we went through our last district rezoning back in 2017 and realized that we'll get into the details of the actual policy and procedure, but it had been quite some time since parents who helped develop the policy and procedure were a part of the process. So we felt, and the board felt, that there was a need to reintroduce redistricting and how it actually works to our community. So as a commitment to our voters, we are providing information about this process before we begin. So again, as Susan shared, we do not have any maps. We are here to engage you on how the process works and answer any question. And the importance of that is we're asking questions now, or answering questions now, because once we begin redistricting in September, we will not be answering questions. So today and tomorrow is your opportunity for two-way feedback. So you can ask questions. We will do our best to answer all of those. But when we start the process in September, we will ask you questions and you will give us feedback. And in turn, we will respond to that feedback in the form of maps or data. So this is your opportunity to ask as many questions. We will have as much data available on our website. So as I get to some of those points in the presentation, I will say, once we get to this point in our process, we will provide all the information on our website. So rest assured, this process is transparent. There is access to all the information, all the data that we have available and can provide to you. We will provide to all the community members for the greater community at large. So if I can make my slides progress. All right. So this is Redistricting 101. Just for those who may be on a time constraint, this part of the presentation we hope to get through in about 30 minutes. We're going to talk about the purpose of redistricting. We're going to review the actual policy and the elements of it. We're going to talk about all of the redistricting data requirements, so forecasting, mobility, residential development, and then the actual procedure. As I said, it's a community process, and we'll talk about what that process looks like, what the maps, how the process evolves from the beginning of asking questions to the actual presentation of a final recommendation to the board. This process has been presented nationally and is a national exemplar. Our school board has been acclaimed for this actual process for redistricting, being so first objective, providing what the rules of engagement are, what we hold true as important to us as a school district for setting attendance boundaries, and then involving the community and taking their feedback and developing maps. A lot of school districts across the country develop a plan and present that to the community. But before we actually touch a map, we ask you questions about what's important to you related to the board's criteria. So we're going to talk about that process. We're going to show you how it works and then answer your questions for the remaining amount of time that we have. All right, so what is redistricting? So every address within Fulton County has an assigned attendance boundary. And redistricting is the process of establishing what school zone that address will attend. So right now, and since 2017, we've had the same attendance boundaries based on your residential address in place for elementary, middle, and high. But what we're looking at is possibly reassigning some neighborhoods and addresses to other schools within the district. So when does redistricting take place? Typically, and in the past, like I said, I've been here since 1998. It's typically when we open a new school or we have a major renovation project. So we're adding on classroom space to meet some type of either facility concern or there's an additional capacity needed within a building. We also look at redistricting in another process that the district undergoes, which is our school closure or consolidation. And we've had some of those where we've closed campuses and shuffled or rezoned students from one school campus to another. So that is another opportunity for redistricting to occur. What we are looking at in this redistricting is the fourth category. So we have an imbalance in enrollment. So while we're not opening schools, well, in North Fulton, we are addressing an opening of a particular school, Crabapple Middle School. But for the majority of the community, we're looking at imbalances of enrollment. So that means school A may be more overcrowded than school B. So there's an imbalance and those schools are in close proximity. So we need to look at moving students from one school zone to another to address that imbalance. So who determines the scope of redistricting? So before we go into a recommendation or process for redistricting, in every March, I present to the school board the enrollment projections. Included in that those enrollment projections are capacity for each school. For elementary and middle, we have a unique capacity algorithm that I'll explain later in the presentation. For high school, we look at state capacity. When we look at that enrollment and capacity, you can see from the data that there may be imbalances in enrollment and capacity across the district. So at that point, we will start a conversation with the board that we have some schools that are more overcrowded than others. If the board agrees, and we will say, we may need to look at possibly redistricting because a new school site is not on the horizon, and this imbalance will continue to grow looking at projected enrollment. So if the board agrees, staff and identifies anticipated impact communities. So I heard on the news the other day from WSB that we're looking at over 80 schools. So we have included in our scope for this redistricting that we are looking at North Fulton and South Fulton. We try to be very broad in our scope as we begin the process because we don't have any maps in place. So we don't know which communities immediately will be impacted. So we ask everyone to at least attend the meetings. Stay engaged, be abreast of what's going on, because we don't want to assume that a community is not involved or not a part of the redistricting, and somewhere along the process that community comes into play. So we say North Fulton, South Fulton, elementary, middle, and high is our scope for this particular rezoning effort. And I'll kind of use the words rezoning and redistricting interchangeably, but they mean the exact same thing. So how do we redistrict? So when I started in 1998, our very first redistricting was a North Fulton Elementary. I remember being at Portables up at Lake Windward. And prior to that time, the board, the community and the principals would assign a representative. There was a redistricting committee who would make decisions relative to how attendance boundaries were set. So the equivalent of an SGC member or a PTA president would sit on that committee and make those decisions. However, what the board realized in September of 2000 or prior to that time, that they wanted to be more inclusive of the entire community. And there was not a need for a representative voice, but for all voices to be heard equally. So they passed a policy and a procedure as well that allowed community input, as well as define what is important for redistricting. So we have what's called primary criteria, and those are the things that determine the larger majority of attendance boundaries. And we'll get into the details of those in the next slide. We also have what's called our secondary criteria. Within policy AD, we also have attached to it a procedure that defines how we involve the community and how feedback is received, how those comments, how those meetings will work, where parents are provided an opportunity to be a part of this process. We have used policy and procedure for revising attendance boundary in the planning and opening of more than 40 schools in the last 22 years, as well as looked at 3 closures within this same time frame. So it is tried and true. It has worked. And it is an excellent tool, again, as I said, a national exemplar for revising attendance boundaries. So primary criteria is based on data and logistics. So the 3 categories for primary criteria, and we'll get into the details of how this looks, is geographic proximity, how close you are to a school site, projected enrollment. So we look at not just the students who are here today, but where we anticipate growth in the future. We look at capacity, and that's different. Again, I talked about elementary and middle having a different algorithm for capacity than high schools, which we use state capacity for that figure. So these 3 criteria provide more than 75 to 80% of how we set attendance boundaries. There is a caveat that is noted at the bottom of the slide. Students are not always assigned to their closest school. All 3 of these criteria must be considered and all students must be assigned. When we start the process of looking at geographic proximity, and you'll have a better feel of this when I show a little bit of the map, we have to start at the border or the county boundary and move inward towards a school site. So let's say, for example, if I was starting at the Forsyth County line and I was filling to a school site and had to assign all the students that were from the county boundary to the actual first high school that they would attend, oftentimes the school is close to capacity by the time we get to those school sites. And in those instances, students may be assigned to their second or third closest school based on available capacity within the region. So secondary criteria. These criteria are used when primary criteria offer more than one option for a school assignment. So let's say neighborhood A has the option of going to school A or school B. We may look at secondary criteria, which is often what the community provides feedback around to help us inform which assignment that particular neighborhood, which school that neighborhood would be assigned to. Primary criteria are things such as traffic patterns, right and left turns, major arteries in a community that provides some sense of travel barriers, safety issues, things like that that we consider in regards to secondary criteria. Not so much a factor for this redistricting, but the board also said we should consider how frequently neighborhoods have been rezoned. We don't want to move students more than once within a 3-year period. So they're not moved more than one time in their elementary being the largest grade band within that time of them being in a school site. So we think about how many times a neighborhood has been rezoned and take that into consideration when we weigh out secondary criteria. We also look at school feeder alignment. So as students matriculate from elementary to middle and middle to high school, we want to ensure that that 5th and 8th grade class allow for a greater percentage of students matriculating from one school to the next. Because our schools aren't sized big enough for elementaries to feed, all of them to feed directly into a middle and all of our middle schools to feed directly into a high school, we want to ensure that that percentage of split where we have splits is an acceptable percent. And we also look at balancing of special programs. And you may understand this a little bit more when I get into the explanation of space. But because our class sizes such for programs such as TAG, ESOL, and special needs are much smaller, we want to ensure that those classroom needs are equally as possible distributed amongst the schools that we have within an area. So that's a secondary criteria as well, balancing our special programs. So how do we quantify and measure those criteria? So during this process, we'll take your feedback and we want you to understand how we use that to develop alternative plans and then actually the final recommendation. So we use a tool that is based on geographic information systems or a GIS. So very similar technology to your Waze mapping, your MapQuest. Data that you see shared by CDC around medical statistics. It is on a platform for a company called Esri, which is the Microsoft of GIS. And we use a tool called Davis Demographics and Planning that helps us enable our data or be able to visually see data on a map. We use a tool called School Site Pro from Davis Demographics that is a GIS-based tool that allows mapping and data analysis for school planning. So what exactly do we do with that data? So we are able to develop our enrollment projections, not based on percentage growth or grade level shifts in Excel. We actually do that on a map. And within those mapping applications, we're able to define attendance boundaries as well. It is a cohort-based tool, meaning as we do enrollment projections, we start with our existing grades of students and we matriculate them forward. And then we have factors included that are explicitly considered against some of our student populations. So residential development, we're able to see where development occurs and anticipate that impact for the future for additional students in our population, in our enrollment projections. We also take into consideration mobility rates and birth rates as well in our boundary planning for our forecasting tool as well as for redistricting. So using our primary criteria of geographic proximity, and for those of you who were here in the last redistricting, you're very familiar with this map. It looks like a bunch of puzzle pieces that are what we call our study areas. Our study areas are neighborhood groupings used to create our attendance boundary. It's the smallest unit of geography that we use in planning for forecasting as well as redistricting. Each year, we refine our study areas. So we look at where new streets are, where new development is. And we refine these study areas based on the most recent information that we have. To date, we have over 1,500 study areas. So what you see is a depiction of neighborhood groupings. This is North Fulton, and the colors are our elementary school boundaries. So we're able to provide data based on these study areas for multiple things. So our attendance boundaries, our enrollment projections, and this will be the tools that we start our redistricting discussion around for this fall. So when we assess geographic proximity, we will allocate the geographic center of every single study area across the district. So we're able to put what we call a centroid in the middle of every study area and allocate it for routing to its first closest school, second closest school, and its third closest school. This is important as we go through the process of developing boundary alternatives, because as I said, we have to start at the county boundary and fill towards a school site. So it's important for us to know, because geographic proximity is a primary criteria. What is this community's first, second, and third closest school as we consider options to develop plans for rezoning? We also look at each of these dots. Each dot on this map represents one of the 90,000+ students that we have and where they live. Even if a student does not attend their home school, let's say, for example, they're here on a hardship transfer, they're on curriculum difference, or they're special education and they're housed within a center, not their home school. We have a method on a map to cohort them through their feeder pattern, as well as provide context to what their enrollment projection will be moving forward. So student population is the basis of how we develop our enrollment projections. And as we adjust and manipulate boundaries to create alternatives, we can tell you how many students were impacted on the map based on our ability to geocode them to their residential address. So our forecasting methodology. What is included beyond the existing students? We have our geocoded students. Of course, that is today's population. We also include out-of-zone students, so students who may be in magnet programs, hardship transfers, as I said, center-based populations. We also have charter schools that at the end of, let's say, it's a K-8, we have those students returning to our traditional high school. We are able to capture that population within our forecasting methodology. For residential development, we track residential development working with our municipal planning agencies across all of our cities, and we work closely with them from rezoning all the way to land disturbance and a structure or a building or a community being built. We also have a third-party data source that provides quarterly sales. So we're able to tell what communities are selling, how many homes have closed in the last quarter. We're also able to produce from our built-out communities, how many students did we yield, elementary, middle, and high, from each community, to then apply a student yield to determine how many future students we will have from future development within our county. These yields are unique, not just to a city, but down to a high school boundary, because what we found over time is that student yields and how many homes or students are generated from a subdivision is very unique to communities. So what we see at Milton is not the same as Johns Creek, is not the same as Westlake, is not the same as Banneker. So we have unique factors for every single high school, for every single development. We also look at our historical enrollment. So what is our district typically, how we've grown in areas? We have cohort factors for every region, for every grade band across the district. We also look at birth factors. We collect data from the state to anticipate how many children were born in a community, to inform how many kindergarten population, how many kindergarten students will enroll in our district for each year, for each school. We also collect what we call mobility factors. So in and out migration, people ask, Ingrid, how do you account for private school return or students who exit the district at a particular community? So we see in some communities that students exit at middle school and return at high school. Or we see where private school students, based on age, they will enter our district at second grade when the compulsory age of attendance is not a factor. So we're able to capture that data in what we call our mobility factors, and it's all a part of our enrollment projections. And that data is used to provide not only estimates for the next year, but it also gives us 5 to 7 year forecasts to inform where we anticipate population changes in our district across all 3 regions and schools. So how accurate have our forecasts been? So for years, our forecasts have been within a plus or minus 1% accuracy. Forecast is based on our first month enrollment count. And as you can see, we've been pretty accurate. I like to toot our horn. Middle and high school, we do an absolutely amazing job. And in most of our elementary schools, we do as well. For the last 2 years, you can see our enrollment's been varying. But when COVID hit in 2020, we did have some challenges with redistricting. We saw a large exit of our kindergarten and first grade students. I am happy to say that this year, we are seeing the return of some of that population continuing across the district. We don't have the accuracy for this year published because, again, forecasted enrollment is based on the first month count, which we have not reached that mark yet. We will in the next few days. However, based on the 10-day count, we were only about 300 students off. Knowing that our enrollment continues to grow, I anticipate our forecast accuracy to be extremely close this year, which means our processes and our guesstimates and estimates and data analysis have all returned to what our expectations are, and we expect to be pretty accurate for this school year. So capacity is our second primary criteria. So capacity for elementary and middle school is based on the number of classrooms in each building. So this algorithm, as I said, is different for elementary and middle because what we found is based on classroom and instructional needs, it's important that we count not just what the state says we can accommodate in a building, but what the instructional program needs are to meet the population in a school. For example, many of our schools have special programs such as TAG, ESOL, EIP, and all of those classrooms have a reduced class size. So TAG may be 16 or 21. Special education, there may be 11 students. ESOL, they may be 16. Each one of those class sizes are different. So the number of students in the class is not as important. What's important is that each teacher needs a classroom. So we use a process for elementary and middle school capacity that is based on what the instructional programs are. Some of our schools have centers. We need to count those classrooms. Some of our schools have high concentrations of TAG. We need to count the classrooms, not the number of students. And as we go through the process, you'll see data related to classroom capacity for elementary and middle schools. For high schools, we use what's called state capacity. The state comes in and they count the number of instructional classroom units, and they apply basically a multiplier based on, let's say, 30 students per classroom. Because of flexibility in scheduling for a high school, and the fact that students have, teachers have a planning period, we found that state capacity is the best metric to count high school space. But for elementary and middle, we use classroom capacity. And we'll have a demonstration of how that works. So this is a sample school. You can see within this spreadsheet we count the number of general ed classroom spaces. I'm going to take my cursor and we highlight the number of self-contained, that's SC, pre-K students, and then general ed, kindergarten, all the way to 5th grade. Using class sizes, we're able to count the number of classrooms that we need to meet the projected enrollment at this school. So the capacity, the enrollment is 563 students. We need 23 general ed classrooms. But what about the instructional program within this building? They have 2 pre-K. They have 2 EIP. We count ESOL, we count TAG, we count special education classrooms. And if a principal has additional funding and they've done some class size reduction for Title I or any type of science labs or things like that, we count those classrooms to determine, based on the instructional program, this school needs 19 classrooms. We also count constants. So we give every school music classrooms, computer labs, a teacher planning space, and every school is treated the same to normalize space across the district. We count 8 classrooms for count constants. So based on the general ed and the instructional program within this sample, Dunwoody Springs Elementary School, you can see that they have a classroom demand of 50 classrooms. Based on the floor plan of their building, they have 55 classrooms within their building. So which means they have an overall -5 need, which if you were assessing the building, you would say that Dunwoody Springs has space within their building. So a negative number means there's excess classrooms in the building. A positive number would mean that that school is overcrowded and you may see portables on their campus. I just wanted to provide a spreadsheet to break down how this actually works and how we're able to calculate what the actual needs are for this school, as an example. To explain, as we go into the data table, you'll see these numbers and how they correlate to classroom needs. So our procedure for attendance boundaries, again, our neighborhood study areas are the building blocks of how we set our attendance boundaries. Again, we want to be forward thinking and forward looking because our enrollment projections include future development, in and out migration of students. And we want to minimize the number of times we shift communities. So in the process, we will provide multiple years of data because we do not want to shift communities more than one time. So we'll provide the projections based on the communities and the development that we see occurring. Within our process, we gather feedback around the secondary criteria and our attendance boundary alternatives and draft plans as we go through the 3 rounds of meetings. So community engagement. So everyone within Fulton County, whether you are a parent or whether you are just a taxpayer and have a vested interest in this process, you're able to equally participate. So each one of our meetings will begin with a general presentation. We will provide ground level information. We will begin at the beginning for each presentation. We will provide information on the criteria. We will bring everyone up to speed no matter where they start in the process. So meeting 1, there'll be a general presentation. We will then, so that's me. We will then break you up into small groups. Those are working groups. So it's important during this process that we're able to hear your voice and capture your comments. So we do that by breaking you into small working groups, and we will place you in a classroom. The first meeting, you will be grouped by your middle school feeder pattern. So whether your child is in middle school or not, you will be broken into a group based on your middle school assignment. We will have trained facilitators who will be there to engage you in dialogue around specific questions related to the criteria. So we'll break you up. This gives you the assurance that there is equity in the process, so everyone's voice is heard. We use the same process, whether we're rezoning elementary, middle, or high school, or whether we're rezoning in North Fulton, South Fulton, or in Sandy Springs. All of our comments that we receive are focused solely on the criteria. We will not consider any comments related to anything not within the criteria. So, just to explain what that means, housing type, single family, multifamily, condos, does not matter. Ethnicity, it's federally prohibited to consider redistricting based on race or ethnicity. Those comments will not be received, will not be collected. Home value, we do not have anything within our criteria based on home price or whether or not changes in attendance boundary could potentially impact your home value. Those are not criteria that are included in what the board has said are important, and those comments will not be collected by our facilitator, nor will they be considered during our online process as well. So we have, again, as I mentioned, facilitators. These are objective participants. They can only accept feedback related to the board approved criteria. And we are committed to receiving all and considering appropriate feedback. However, keep in mind, when we hear comments for one pro move, we may hear a counter argument on the other side. So we have to be able to balance multiple perspectives related to the criteria, balance that against our objective, and sometimes all input cannot be accommodated. I have done this process numerous times, and I will reassure you that for the most part, the greater majority will be satisfied with the outcome. If you are not, you should at least understand the rationale. So we have to shift boundaries. We have to move students. So we have to achieve the objective that the board has set forward in regards to balancing enrollment and capacity. We do ask that when you're in your small breakout sessions, that you respect each other's opinions. So if there's someone in that meeting, in that small group that has a differing opinion than yours, that you allow them to give feedback and that you allow them to answer whatever the question is, and they should give you that same opportunity. We will also have on each of our agendas, so when you come to a meeting, you will gather an agenda. It will have a room assignment that will break you up into a small group. There's a QR code on the first one that will allow you to send questions in to ask those questions of staff, and we will provide those back on our website. So how does the process work? In round one, we will collect your input based on the board approved criteria. We will provide the puzzle pieces or the study area map for each classroom for you to consider. We will also have those online. We will not have any maps available based on moves because we're going to ask you questions, and then based on your feedback, we will then develop options. So for those, I've received some requests for data. We have not formulated the data. So as I said, the forecast is based on the first month, which is the 20-day count of school. We are on day 16, I believe. We have not reached the 20 days, so we don't have any data yet. So we haven't developed any plans. We do not have the forecast generated for the district yet. So we don't have anything available to share at this time. The breakout session for round one will focus on a series of 4 questions. For any constituent, parent, or community member who's not able to attend the online forum, the meeting in person, you have the opportunity to participate in an online forum where you can answer the same questions until midnight the following day. So North and South has different meetings. The online forum will be available beginning the day of the in-person meeting up until the midnight following for you to provide feedback as well. And I want to add one additional comment. So comments are based on quality of comments, not quantity of comments. And I say that because every subdivision or community is not the same size. So I don't want parents who live in smaller communities to feel that larger subdivisions will outweigh your feedback. This is not a vote. We ask for feedback based on the criteria, not based on how many people vote for a particular comment or a particular option. So if I'm in a smaller community and my comment is more directly related to the criteria than a subdivision sending me a form letter, then that one comment outweighs the 200 copies of a form letter that a community may send. And we will also only count those form letters that communities like to send as one comment, because it's the same comment and it weighs the same against a smaller subdivision as well. So the 4 questions for round 1 is based on neighborhood groupings. So in terms of factors such as natural geographic barriers, HOAs, shared amenities, tell us youth teams, events, Girl Scouts, Boy Scouts, what communities should remain together and why. Your why should be related to the criteria. So if you share swim and tennis, if your community has a Girl Scout troop with a neighboring community, we want to hear that feedback, because as we look at study areas, we want to be able to keep those communities together. Now, keeping communities together could mean that both of you move one way or another, but we need to keep those communities together based on the feedback that you provide. Traffic concerns that may impact safe and timely transportation of students to and from schools. We also ask about residential development. And this question is more about redevelopment, because what we found is that communities often know more about subdivisions or apartment complexes that are considering closure. So we want to consider redevelopment and double check our data based on what you as a community may see. And also about multiple rezonings, not really a factor, but these are one of the questions that we ask. There are some communities based on where they sit, they are typically moved multiple times. So if there are multiple rezonings as an impact to your community, we want to ask that question. I'm going to speed up. I realize I'm going a little bit slow, but after round 1, we'll take your feedback, the meeting comments and the online comments, and we'll come back, develop the forecast, and develop alternative plans for round 2. That is done with an academic and operations leadership team that collaboratively works together. So transportation, ESOL, special education, operational planning, as well as our zone superintendents sit on a committee that develops options for each of our rounds. We have meeting comments and online comments. Because our meeting comments have been vetted by our facilitators and we know we've only taken appropriate comments, those will only be published online. We do capture, read, and assess our online comments, but we do not publish them online because they are not reviewed or screened for appropriateness. So they are all provided to the board at the end in the final recommendation, but those comments will not be published on our website. So here's an example. This was a process that we went through for redistricting, and you can see we actually capture the comments. We denote them based on traffic, based on students who walk, based on neighborhood groupings. So we go and review these comments based on the feedback that we receive and based on how our study areas are assigned for elementary, middle, and high school, first, closest, and second schools. And this is just for demonstration purposes to show you that we really do assess and review all of our comments. So we also have, as we develop our attendance boundaries, what we call our gray areas. These become our opportunities for creating alternative plans. So we may look at a specific school and say, these neighborhoods are too close to the school site. They probably don't need to be a part of the plan. So those are some of the shaded communities, and this is a sample, but we may say areas in the gray are opportunities to look for revising attendance boundaries. So in meeting 2, based on the feedback, we will present 3 alternative maps. So we'll have elementary, middle, and high for each group of plans. We'll have data tables that correlate to each of the maps. We'll also have feeder patterns to help you see, because feeder patterns are a secondary criteria. We will go through the same process. There will be a group presentation. We will break you into small groups again with our facilitators to ask you, what do you like about this map? What do you not like about the map? And you have to tell us, based on the board approved criteria, traffic patterns, neighborhood groupings, geographic proximity, what you like or don't like about each of the maps that we present in round 2. Again, we typically provide 3 alternative maps, A, B, and C, and there will be elementary, middle, and high for each of those plans. The online forum, again, will be available through midnight the following day, and you're able to provide the same feedback online that you are during the community forum. So this is an example. During the redistricting, you'll see these types of maps. The colors will be where we see the changes that we're recommending for alternative plan A. And we'll have descriptions of what this looks like, what the impact of feeder pattern alignment is. We'll also have a data table. So this data table shows you what the current enrollment is at the school, as well as, based on the plan, what the correlated plan and data, how it changes the attendance boundary, what the classroom needs are based on the changes in each of the plans. So you'll have this data to inform you as you go through providing feedback. And we also include any schools in the impacted area. So we'll have lots of data tables because we're looking elementary, middle, and high school in North and South Fulton. You'll have the current year and then future years as well. So in that data table, you'll be able to see what the current enrollment is and what the 3-year forecasts are for those data. So after round 2, we will collect your comments. We will analyze those based on the criteria, and we will develop a draft plan map for round 3. That again will be developed with the leadership team composed of academics and operations. So in round 3, we present typically 1 draft map. So it's a reduced number of maps. We will have a draft map for elementary, middle, and high school. We will also have those accompanying data tables and feeder patterns. And we will provide you the opportunity to tell us again, based on the board approved criteria, what do you like about this map? What do you not like about this map? Online forum will be available, just as it has in the 2 previous rounds, for parents and community members who cannot attend in person to give feedback the following day. After that meeting, we will analyze the comment and develop a final recommendation with the team. Now, there has only been 1 instance in the 22 years I've been doing this that the final recommendation was one of the maps previously presented. So we take into consideration the feedback that we receive and make any possible adjustments that we can to accommodate what that feedback is, as long as it's related to the criteria. We will present the recommended plan to the board on November 8th. And the board at that point becomes the opportunity and the voice of redistricting. So prior to this slide, I have not mentioned the board at all. Staff has been charged with directing and guiding the community through the rezoning process. The board has been outside or external to this process and have not been a part intentionally. The board only responds to a final recommendation. So once the board has received a recommendation, that is the community's opportunity to engage the board because they have a map of which to respond to. They will receive community input based on the recommendations at their November and December meetings, as well as in their community meetings. That will be the opportunity for the community to say what we don't like or what we do like about those plans. The board has the option in December to select the recommendation that staff has presented. They can adjust that attendance plan, a boundary plan, and then have the option to approve the final recommendation in December 5th, on December 15th of this calendar year. So those approved boundaries will go into effect in August of 2023. Students who are impacted by redistricting will be notified. This process is a little bit shorter. We need to ensure that our high school students are ready for scheduling in January. So students who are impacted will be notified in January of 2023 at the beginning of the second semester. We have in our policy what's called grandfathering. So students who will be in their highest grade that are impacted by redistricting in the 2023-24 school year at elementary and middle school have the option to remain. Their parents will be notified. They have to provide that consent back, but they can keep their student in their previously zoned school and provide transportation to and from school. High school is a little bit different. If you are physically in the building and you're a rising 10th, 11th, or 12th grader, you have the option to remain at your current zone school. So everything related to redistricting, it's important that you always check this website. You can scan this QR code. It'll take you straight there. FultonSchools.org redistricting. Everything related to redistricting will be included on this website. So parents will often ask, when do I know that my community is safe? If you have not been a part of any plan in round 2 or round 3, your community will not be impacted in redistricting. We will not recommend to the board any community moves that have not been vetted through the public process. So your place of safety comes after round 3. If you've not been in any map moved, that is when you know you are safe. On our redistricting site, as you prepare for our September meetings, there is a public record of everything that we do, all of our data. So for those who have asked about the data counts for study areas, that will be published on our website once we have the student counts after the first month count. So we will provide that on our website. There's also information about this process. There's a FAQ and a Q&A that we publish ongoing from past redistrictings that may help answer some of your questions. And then the online community forum will be hosted on our website as well. So that concludes the presentation, and we will now, I'm not viewing the chat, but if there are any questions, we will take you, I will answer any questions, and people, I believe, Susan, we're going to allow them to come off mute to ask questions, and I will do my best to try to address them.
Yes, I will unmute. If what we could do is ask you to raise your hand for the chat, we'll use that to call on you. And also, please remember that we would prefer that we know that you'll ask questions regardless, but this is really about asking questions about the process, not about asking about your specific neighborhood or your specific city, really just about the process. Wanted to remind everyone that even though we had stated this is the only time to ask questions, it's not. This is just really an in-depth opportunity to ask questions about the process. Certainly, we'll be taking questions over the next 2 or 3 months, especially as you have more information to inform you. So that said, I see some hands raised, and let's see if I can take our first person. I believe I've just unmuted Emily. It just says Emily.
Yes, hi. In the round 1 slide where you had colored areas and grayed areas, will the grayed areas, are those the ones that are potentially being moved, and are the colored areas then considered safe? Is that how I understood it?
The gray areas are the opportunities to create the plans. So those are the areas that possibly could be shifted. And that was just for demonstration. We will go and look at, based on the forecast and the capacity, which we haven't captured yet, what are ideal communities that could remain within an attendance boundary. So those are our opportunities for possible shifts.
So if you lived in the color areas, let's say we go to the meeting and we lived in the colored areas, are we considered safe at that point?
So we won't publish what the gray areas are. So that will be a part of the plan development. So as we go through the process in GIS, we're able to look at the projections and the capacity and look at neighborhoods along the border of, let's say, an overcrowded school and say these communities may be considered for a shift. So unless you are not recommended, so if you've not been included in any of the plans A, B, or C in round 2 or the draft plan in round 3, should you ever consider yourself safe?
Understood. Thank you.
Thank you.
Sorry. Next, we have Penny Myers.
This is Ingrid. My question has 2 parts. Number 1, you mentioned that if we can provide our own transportation, we can choose to remain to that specific school that we were initially started, from kindergarten all the way to whichever grade our children are at this point. Am I correct? Am I understanding that comment correct?
If your community is impacted in redistricting, and let's say it's an elementary school, if your child will be a rising 5th grader, if you're in middle school and you're a rising 8th grader, you can be considered for grandfather. If you're in high school and you're a rising 10th, 11th, or 12th grader, you can be considered. Now, that does not apply to younger siblings. So let's say you had a 3rd grader and a rising 5th grader. The 3rd grader would not be grandfathered. Only the rising 5th grader would be considered and allowed to remain at the previous zone school for the next school year.
So for instance, if we have a 5th grader rising to the 6th grade middle school, that not being considered to be grandfathered?
That student would not be in the highest grade of the school that they're being rezoned in. So if you're in middle school, you have to be a rising 8th grader, not a 6th grader, an incoming 6th grader. No, ma'am.
Okay. That's my number 1 question. Number 2 question would be regarding those special education programs that you mentioned. If the students or student was in IEP or in TAG or whichever special needs program, what would be the consideration at this point?
So there is no consideration for a student with an IEP to remain at their school. As I mentioned, special education is a part of this process. So there may be a relocation of a center due to space. We do look at if we're moving students who have special needs, that we reallocate those programs to the rezoned school to count the classroom space. So that is considered within our process. But we do not have considerations for students to remain based on IEPs to negate a redistricting. No, ma'am.
Okay. Thank you for answering my questions, Ms. Ingrid.
Thank you.
All right, next up we have Kristen Patterson. I can get you off mute.
Yes, just a quick question. Where would we be able to find the capacity levels, the state capacity levels for high schools?
High school state capacity, if you go to our board docs website, where you can see the meetings, and we will publish this on our website, but if you just wanted to look today, the enrollment presentation is presented every March. And within that report, it has enrollment and forecast, and it has capacity based on the current school year. So high school state capacity only changes if there's an addition or any type of alteration to a building. So those numbers are based on what was the state capacity for last school year. And I believe there's just a little bit of variation, but for the most part, those are the current numbers.
Okay,
But we
and
will
thank
publish
you.
those on our website for redistricting.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
Okay, thank you. Next up, we have Albert Yang. Mr. Yang, if you have a
Thank you.
question. There you are.
Yes.
Thank you.
Thank you so much for your time today. This has been very helpful and very informative. My question might be out of the scope of this meeting, but it's related to geographic proximity. How does all this factor into when Fulton County Schools looks at either relocating or building an additional school? In the case that affects our family, the middle school is tucked all the way into the corner of the North Fulton systems. It's got APS to the south and DeKalb to the east, so pretty much 270 degrees. Everyone's coming from a pretty far distance because it's all the way at the corner, almost to the boundary of both. But again, it might be out of the scope of this meeting.
So Mr. Yang, that is a little bit out of scope, and I just don't want to take everyone's time.
Okay.
But I would be more than happy to answer that question. You can send me an email at
Okay.
huff@fultonschools.org, and I'll be
Perfect.
more than happy to help you.
Thank you
understand
so
how
much.
we build new schools.
Perfect.
Absolutely.
Thank you.
Ingrid, you may be getting lots of emails after that.
So, that's
So
okay.
that's okay. We're here to help you all. We really are. Nancy Quinton, I see you have your hand raised if you'd like to ask your question.
Yeah, if you have a middle schooler who's taking a language in one school and he's wouldn't be grandfathered in, how do you handle it if that language is not offered at a rezoned middle school?
So yes, ma'am, we offer what's called curriculum difference hardships. So that would be outside of the process of redistricting. So if your student's in a specific program and they're rezoned and that foreign language, for example, is not offered, you can apply within the time frame of January 1st to February 28th for a curriculum difference hardship. So as long as there's space and the student's being academically successful in that language or that pathway or program, we would provide that student the option to remain. You would have to transport them to and from school, but they could remain in that school based on that unique curriculum offer.
Got it.
Okay, next we have, I believe it's Jennifer Philpy, if I've said your name correctly.
Yes, you did. Thank you for your time today. I am in a community where there has been discussion regarding the K-8 STEAM model. Unfortunately, there has not been a whole lot of information provided to the community or parents associated with this model. And so is this still a model that's on the table to be included in this redistricting, or have we tabled it for now? Could you provide more information?
So for now, I have not been given any guidance regarding whether K-8, what schools it would be opening in, if it will open at all. For the sake of this redistricting, we do believe we'll be able to review attendance boundaries without that information. Keeping in mind the timing will require a 3-year period. And if those schools are not coming online in the next 3 years, then they would not be a part of this focus. So we just want to ensure that students aren't moved multiple times. And because a decision has not been made yet, we don't think that 3-year requirement would be a part of this process.
So for clarification, how would our community get more information about the feasibility and location of this potential K-8 school, which would impact potentially how some parents may choose to use their voice to advocate for their child?
Take that back to the administration regarding the K-8 to see if there's any discussion we can have from the administration prior to this meeting. I would recommend at this point to follow the K-8 webpage because that was a part of the process. I was a part of those meetings as well to ensure that we are not double shifting students multiple times. So let me recommend that you stay tuned for the September board meeting where we would hope to have some additional direction for K-8.
Thank you very much.
Oh, and if I could just also add to that, Ms. Huff, you had mentioned the K-8 website. That address is www.fultonschools.org/K8. I made that one easy for you. Thank you. Our next question is coming from Brianna G. Brianna, are you still with us? There you are.
Yes, for the mini breakout meetings that will be held, will there be an option to attend virtually or only in person? I know the last time this was done, we all met at Centennial High School. I mean, obviously there are more high schools in the area now since the last time this was done, but what will be the process?
No. So the facilitated part of the meeting will only be in person. However, the feedback will be collected online. So you're able to still answer those questions, provide feedback on the pros and cons in rounds 2 and 3. So no, we will not have an virtual process during the facilitated sessions.
Okay, to piggyback on that question, so the in-person sessions, will they be kind of consolidated how they were last time? I believe most of North Fulton met at Centennial. Will it be like that this time?
So all of North Fulton is meeting at Alpharetta High School.
Alpharetta High, got you.
Yes, I'm sorry. And we didn't, so on our website, www.fultonschools.org/redistricting. We have all the published dates. So the North Fulton meetings will be held at Alpharetta High School. Beginning on September 12th is the first meeting. And the conversation is specific to the location. So I don't want you to think you can go to the North meeting and discuss the South redistricting and go to the South vice versa. So all of North Fulton will meet at Alpharetta High School on September 12th at 6 p.m.
Thank
South
you.
Fulton will meet at Langston Hughes High School on the 15th, September 15th, to engage in South Fulton Elementary, Middle, and High School. So thank you for asking that question. I apologize for not sharing that on the slide, but the community where you will attend is specific to the region at which we will be discussing attendance counts.
Thank you.
Thanks. And Brendan Stearns, who's been our chat room moderator, just posted within the chat the information specific to the dates and times. They are on our redistricting website, but he's pulled them out for you there. I'm also right at this moment posting a link of a PDF that's kind of a visual description of it, if that is helpful for others. We have 2 others who have their hands raised. So I'm going to transition to, it's listed as B. Smith, if she might join us, or he might join us for the question. B. Smith, are you still with us on the to ask a question?
I unmuted.
Oh, there you are. Thank you. Thank you. There you are.
Okay, great. Thank you. This has been very informative. I do have a question about the criteria and capacity. In the presentation, you mentioned that the school board will look at TAG, ESOL, special ed, but what about the high school magnet programs? For example, Tri-Cities has a magnet program, I think, in the arts. Westlake has a magnet program in science and math. So how can you look at capacity without looking at the magnet schools within a school and what classroom space they may need, to, throughout the school year? So I'm just wondering, how do the magnet programs fit into the equation for capacity?
So the magnet programs are not explicitly considered. So we count the students and we count the classrooms within each building, because keep in mind, teachers may teach a full complement of classes, not just to magnet students, based on scheduling and flexibility. So a magnet teacher may have general ed, she may have some AP, she may have some honors, and we aren't able to specify if that classroom is being used just for magnet versus whether or not that classroom is being used to educate students for English. So we don't delineate magnet as we don't delineate any of the other programs that we have in our high schools, but we do take into account the total population. So this process will not decide whether or not a school has or does not have a magnet, whether we shift magnets, but we will take into account that this school is overcrowded or this school is undercrowded. We need to move residential population of students to or from that school because of the number of students that reside in that community. Now, we will, as a administrative review team, review if we need to additional factors such as magnet, but that will not be a consideration for this process explicitly.
Okay, thank you. I have one other quick question. You mentioned that when you're looking at future enrollment and transition, you're looking at home closings, which are single family or purchased homes, private school transition. But what about the fact that in South Fulton, possibly in North Fulton, there are students who live in apartments who are transient because of the economy. They may be evicted, they may have to move, they have to move in with relatives. This economy has just caused a lot of, I guess, differences than maybe we had before. But we do know that in elementary and middle, we do have a lot of that moving around, which makes it hard sometimes for those students to achieve because they're moving around so much from school to school. So I guess the question is that a factor at all, when you're looking at movement among students?
Yes, ma'am. So I mentioned another factor called student mobility.
Okay.
That is in and out migration of students. So we're able to look at that geocode of students, not just for this year, but we're able to look at last year and the year prior. So we're able to see patterns of where students come and go within communities. And because of the power of GIS, if it's unique to an apartment complex, we're able to go and do the digging to figure out why we lost 100 students in a specific study area. So we may call, we do calls of our apartments during the summer period to ask if they have any changes, if they're remodeling some units, because we want to ensure that we appropriately capture the number of students and any changes or influx or outflux that we may see. So we do a check of our apartment complexes as well. I talked about new development, but when we look at home resales, that's captured in our student mobility as well. So if a community's been totally built out and let's say there starts to be a turnover of resales, we're able to look at our mapping and see students weren't there last year, they're there this year. We're able to adjust mobility by each unique community. So we're able to adjust that.
Okay, thank you very much.
Welcome. Thank you.
We do have one more person who's got their hand raised. That person's name is Shepherd. Mr. or Ms. Shepherd, if you'd like to ask your question. If you're able to take yourself off mute, there you are. There you are. Thank you. Mr. or Ms. Shepherd, are you able?
Can you hear me now?
There you are. There you are. Thank you.
I just wanted to confirm, you said that with the rezoning, you look at the homes furthest from the school and come inward, correct?
So if we're at the county boundary, we have to start at the.
Ms. Huff, if you could get a little closer to your microphone. Thank you. Yes, thank you.
So we start from the county boundary at border and fill inward towards the school site. So
okay,
if I started at, let's say, elementary in the middle of the county and filled outward, I would possibly fill that school completely, and all the areas on the outskirts along the border would not be assigned. So I have to ensure that every community is assigned. So we start from the outside and fill into the school site.
Okay, and just to piggyback, so I literally live maybe 2 streets over from the school. So if the school is full, we would then maybe be rezoned to the next school, is what you're saying.
If we reach capacity and there is capacity at the second closest school, we may consider shifting your community from its first closest to its second closest school to balance that enrollment. So geographic proximity does not make you safe per se, because we have to balance enrollment and capacity as well as where future students are coming.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you. Is that
We
everyone?
have one more person with their hand raised, and then we have one question in the chat I'd like to ask after that. So at this point, we're going to close questions except for those already in the queue. So we are going to ask Paulina, if you could ask your question.
Sure. Hi, thank you for all the information. This is really appreciated. One quick question on distance criteria. So how does this get evaluated across all the schools? So for example, if you are rezoned to a new elementary school, but that results in the middle school being the farthest choice just because of how it currently feeds into that middle school or that high school, how do you evaluate and plan for not it being for the distance not being so high for the rest of the schools once the kids move on?
Yes, ma'am. So we will look at the school and geographic proximity for each level. Now, I will say, if the focus is middle, if we're looking, let's say, if you're in North Fulton, we're looking at, let's say your community is impacted by the middle school. It would not be the intent to just redistrict students for the purpose of redistricting. So only if it creates a small split feed would we adjust elementary or high school. So I didn't say that prior to, I know there were about 100 people who logged off. We aren't redistricting just to redistrict. There is a purpose to this process. We are trying to balance enrollment across the schools that are overcrowded, or we have a new school that came online in North Fulton, Crabapple Middle School. So this is about the one-on-one, but we will not just look for communities to move. We are solely trying to achieve an objective, and as few students that we can move as possible will be the goal. So we won't just move high school students or elementary school students because we're in the community moving students. Only if we create an imbalance or a very small split from elementary to middle or middle to high will we adjust those boundaries. Does that answer your question?
Yes, thank you so much.
I'm going to ask a quick, one of our participants in the chat had asked a question about, this person says, I know what TAG is, but what are PAK, ESP, SPEED, and Title I? So those are some of our acronyms, and I wonder if, Ms. Huff, if you could just quickly explain what those are.
So pre-K.
In the microphone, please.
I'm sorry, can you hear me?
Yes, thank you.
Turn my camera off because my head is in the camera. All right, so pre-K are our 4-year-old students. Most of our schools have 2 of those programs in each, well, some of our elementaries have 2 of those classrooms within their schools. SC are our self-contained students. So whether a student has an individualized education plan, which is an IEP, some of them are co-taught in a general ed classroom. But if their needs are so specific or at a certain level, they are served by a teacher, and they are basically they are retained in one classroom setting. So those are students who are self-contained, and they don't transition from class to class. They stay with that special education teacher for their instructional needs. Title I, some schools who have a certain percentage of students who are on free and reduced lunch, they receive additional funding at the school level to provide a reduced number of classrooms or a different funding or additional funding for that school. And a principal may decide to meet this need or educational needs of the student. I may purchase a teacher with that additional funding to reduce class size. So because that teacher is not in what we call our general ed teacher allocation, we have to allocate a space for that teacher because that principal has made that instructional decision and that teacher needs a classroom. I can't remember the other, I only wrote 3 that you asked me about. So those are classrooms that have a specific need and are unique to the instructional needs of the students within that building. So remedial. So if a school has a large number of students who are off grade level or performing below grade level, we have EIP, which are our remedial teachers who work with those students in a reduced class size to bring them up to grade level. What's important as we count space is that teacher needs a classroom. So we count that, just like ESOL, those are our English students who need assistance with language issues. Those students have teachers who help them in that regard. So we need a classroom or a space for those teachers. Speech teachers, any type of special needs, any of our IR, our autism, any of those exceptionalities, they have dedicated classroom space. If there is it escapes me now. Some of the therapy classes, they have dedicated space because of the equipment that's needed at the school. Adaptive art, adaptive PE for some of our special needs students. We need to count a classroom space for those specific programs within our model. So that's what that means.
Okay, we are at 1:32 at this point. We have one more question, so we are not taking any more questions after Keisha Lash Edwards, I believe it is. Just as a quick commercial, I'd like to tell everyone that, I lost my notes, forgive me. That tomorrow there is another Redistricting 101 meeting that's going to be held at 6 p.m. and lasting until 7:30 p.m. We do hope that everyone who has been able to be a part of this meeting has found it valuable and informative. We know we could not answer every single question that you might have. That's why this is just a 101. If you want the real deal, we invite you to attend either the North Fulton or South Fulton redistricting meetings that are in your community beginning in September. The website, fultonschools.org/redistricting, is where you can find those meetings. And of course, we will share that information with the schools to push them out to you as well. If you've never been involved in one of these forums, we highly encourage you to attend. They're actually very, very collaborative. I don't know of any other school system that really takes this kind of focus on making sure the community is involved. So please, please set your calendars. With that, the commercial being done, Ms. Keisha, if you would like to ask your question, we would be glad to hear it.
Hi there. Thank you so much. I'll be brief. Ms. Huff, can you please repeat the point you recently made about feeder patterns and whether or not those may not change? I just want to make sure I heard that correctly.
So when we adjust attendance boundaries, we will look at the board in one of the secondary criteria says school feeder alignment. We want to ensure that we have a proportionate number of students going from elementary to middle, because that's just the 5th grade class. So we don't want to create, as we've adjusted a boundary, create a small split. So if we move a middle school boundary and it creates a very small, let's say 5 to 95% split for that 5th grade class going from the elementary to middle, we would adjust the elementary boundary to coincide to keep that 5% with the 95%, if possible. If we do have to split a community, we like to have an acceptable percentage, typically 20 to 30%. No single percent like a 5 or a 7% split. So that will be a part of the process. Our vertical articulation is what our academics people call it. It's important to keep a cohesive group of students together as they matriculate from elementary to middle or from middle to high school. So we want that number to be large enough where those students have some sense of familiarity as they move to the next grade level.
Thank you so much.
You're welcome. Thank you. And thank you everyone for coming. I really, really appreciate you being a part of the process. And I so look forward to seeing you at round one, either at Alpharetta High School or Langston Hughes High School in the next couple weeks. Thank you so much.
That's right. Thank you all. We are going to terminate the presentation at this point. We will have it posted on the redistricting website as we promised. We'll do that after tomorrow's second 101 meeting. Also, I believe that Microsoft Teams automatically puts a recording within the chat. So that'll be another way that you could go back and watch and listen. Thank you again, and we'll see you next time.